Humanism is given its first real definition in the works of Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, which is kind of a mouthful. Most people just call him Pico. Pico wrote a speech called the Oration on the Dignity of Man in 1486. And it was the preface to a much larger work that never really saw the light of day. He had written a series of 900 theses in on a variety of topics involving theology, natural philosophy, mysticism, a grab bag of propositions that he invited the intellectuals of Europe to come and dispute with him. And he was going to stand there and debate these things. The work, the 900 Theses, was essentially torpedoed by the Pope Innocent VIII, who wanted it studied for heresy. And that was pretty much the end of that. So this speech was never actually given. And it was published years after it was written, just as a document, an historical document of intent. And as that, it reads really quite remarkable for what it's alleging. And that is a full-throated embrace of humanism as it was coming to be. The belief in the dignity of man, as it says. And it's a miraculous, quite frankly, miraculous performance by Pico. He sets out in the beginning, saying that he is trying to have he's trying to set man apart. He's trying to give man his due in human estimation, after a long period where man is seen as somewhat just animalistic. Yes, at the head of the great chain of being, but still hopelessly divided from the divinity. That was the prevailing thought running through the Middle Ages, and he wanted to readjust that, calibrate man just a little bit higher in the great chain of being, and in fact put him outside of it. And that's really where things get interesting. He starts very early on in the speech with by writing a little speech for God to give to Adam, which gives you a sense of the esteem with which he thought himself as a writer. He was only 24, I believe, when he was writing this. He was a very young man, but enormously learned. He was a wealthy man who gave up. He gave up his right to his wealth and lived on family money, but he didn't control it, and dedicated his life to study. And he, in this little speech of God to Adam, he lays out the rationale for man being special. He says, God the Father, the mightiest architect, had already raised, according to the precepts of his hidden wisdom, this world we see, the cosmic dwelling of divinity, a temple most august. He had already adorned the supercelestial region with intelligences, infused the heavenly globes with the life of immortal souls, and set the fermenting dung heap of the inferior world teeming with every form of animal life. You can see that Pico was quite the writer. He again, very well educated, very well trained in rhetoric and persuasion, And here he is using a lot of rhetorical devices to try and swell the interest in his perspective. But when this work was done, the divine artificer still longed for some creature which might comprehend the meaning of so vast an achievement. Rereading Genesis and seeing that, okay, Genesis says that or implies that the world was incomplete, and so we had to have man. And in Genesis, man is the final, or humanity is the final creation, and so this is relatively in concert with that. But the reasoning he provides is significant. At last the Supreme Maker decreed that this creature, to whom he would give nothing wholly his own, should have a share in the particular endowment of every other creature. Taking men, therefore, this creature of indeterminate image, he set him in the middle of the world and thus spoke to him. So right there you've got the centrality of man. Man is at the center of things. Right there, that's a sense of prominence, that's a sense of distinction, that is a position of dominion in the, to use the biblical word there. But then, of course, we get the speech. We have given you, O Adam, no visage proper to yourself, nor endowment properly your own, in order that whatever place, whatever form, whatever gifts you may with premeditation select, these same you may have and possess through your own judgment and decision. The nature of all other creatures is defined and restricted within laws which we have laid down. You, by contrast, impeded by no such restrictions, may, by your own free will, to whose custody we have assigned you, trace for yourself the lineaments of your own nature. I have placed you at the center of the world, so that from that vantage point you may with greater ease glance round you on all the world contains. Wow. Free will. God gives man free will. That's what sets man apart. That is the dignity of man. The ability to choose for himself, the ability to think in a constructive way. All other creatures, according to God, according to Pico, all other creatures have their natures determined for them by nature. They don't get to choose what they'll do or how they'll exist or how they'll thrive. Mankind is different. Mankind is set outside those rules, outside the great chain of being, if you will. Think about that. That's extraordinary. Free will, the ability to think, the ability to choose to think or not to think. There's the rub. We have made you a creature neither of heaven nor of earth, neither mortal nor immortal, in order that you may, as the free and proud shaper of your own being, fashion yourself in the form you may prefer. It will be in your power to descend to the lower brutish forms of life. You will be able, through your decision, to rise again to the superior orders whose life is divine. It's entirely up to mankind in this conception. Mankind has the ability to choose whether to be a lower brutish form of life or a higher celestial one. Now you can see right there the privileging of people like Pico himself. Pico Mirandola is a philosopher, a lover of wisdom, a scholar. He is wealthy enough to do that. He has had all the opportunities to be able to pursue that. And he is saying that because of that, he is above everybody else. Well, okay. Can mankind escape nature? Can mankind escape his circumstances? Can any individual human being simply choose logically, rationally, to be one thing or another, or are circumstances driving the bus on that one? This debate rolls on. There's really no answer to that, I suspect. But this is a dominant, full-throated affirmation of, yes, mankind can do that. Mankind has the ability to say, I will be different. I will be better. I will not succumb to my surroundings. I will rise above and be like God. That's significant. And it is through the pursuit of philosophy, through the pursuit of the liberal arts, that that one achieves these things. Again, Pico is somewhat crediting himself on this one, or at least saying, well, I'm okay, and everybody would be better off if they'd just be more like me. Maybe they would be. His logic is that by studying the liberal arts, you improve yourself. You make yourself more capable of discerning the works of God, the image of God in nature. In fact, he writes, however, the dignity of the liberal arts, which I am about to discuss, and their value to us, is attested not only by the Mosaic and Christian mysteries, but also by the theologies of the most ancient times. Let us be driven, O Father, by those Socratic frenzies which lift us to such ecstasy that our intellects and our very selves are united with God. And if we shall be moved by them in this way as previously we have done all that lies in us to do, if by morals philosophy the power of our passions shall have been restrained by proper controls so that they achieve harmonious accord, and if by dialect our reasons shall have progressed by an ordered advance, then, smitten by the frenzy of the muses, we shall hear the heavenly harmony from the inward ears of the spirit. A couple of things significantly in that passage. First of all, the intermingling of Socrates and the Muses, figures of the classical Greek world, the classical Greek tradition, mixed in with images of Christian God. He is taking a very broad view. The liberal arts for him are very liberal indeed. They encompass a great span of knowledge, and all work in some form of concert. It's a theory that called Syncretism, where he's trying to synthesize the wisdom of the ages in all traditions around a single truth. Different scholars will tell you that that the central truth is a little bit uncertain sometimes. He asserts very forthrightly in front of this group of largely Catholic authorities that it is all in the celebration and scaffolding of Christian Catholic doctrine. But it's a little unclear sometimes, scholars will say, about the actual philosophical core of what he's saying. Visible signs of nature, the invisible things of God, will make us drunk with the richness of the house of God. Drunk is interesting. Just like when he talks about the frenzy of the muses, this kind of ecstasy, this kind of mystical irrationality that is particularly Pico in this. He goes a little far out on this. It's his Neoplatonist tradition, where he becomes a bit more of an enthusiast for extreme rationality, or extreme exercises of thought that push beyond true scientific knowledge, where the ability to think and to imagine just goes a little bit beyond the natural world. And here he is celebrating that a little bit. He is drawing from a number of sources that would be classified as mystics. He says that he is drawn from ancient Hebrew sources, much of that within the tradition of the Kabbalah, mysticism, which eludes logic and reason and gives over to a kind of irrationality and sensibility that is beyond rational thought, quite frankly. But he also incorporates mystics and rock solid philosophers as well, from the Islamic tradition, from Eastern sources. He is drawing from a very broad swath of wisdom to carve out his ideas, and they are all in his argument useful for elucidating the mysteries of God, the Christian God, and the Christian creation of the universe. All of this is fair game for developing an appreciation and an ability to read the mind of God. And he distinguishes this, he privileges this purpose of philosophy as a kind of ideal, as certainly above the ordinary lot of humanity. And he takes a few swipes at business, practical matters, mundane things. The whole study of philosophy, such is the unhappy plight of our time, is occasion for contempt and contumely rather than honor and glory. The deadly and monstrous persuasion has invaded practically all minds that philosophy ought not to be studied at all or by very few people. He's taking a swipe here at people who say, well, what's that good for? What's the use of that? What's the use of philosophy? What's the use of the liberal arts? You know, why can't you pick a practical major that'll get you a job when you're done? He disdains that. He says that, well, no, that's the wrong way of looking at things. This is a problem. This is a failing of humanity. This would be an example of people choosing to crawl on the ground, as he says, as opposed to climbing to the heavens. And he pushes back a little bit. He says, since their whole life is concentrated on gain and ambition, they never embrace the knowledge of the truth for its own sake. And here he's really getting at truth for its own sake. Knowledge, philosophy, wisdom has a value beyond the ordinary, beyond the mundane. But it also sharpens specific intellectual skills. Philosophy has taught me to rely on my own convictions rather than on the judgments of others, and to concern myself less with whether I am well thought of than whether what I do or say is evil. So philosophy makes you a better person. And for somebody who is packing this speech with citations and classical references from a variety, a very broad scope of learning and scholarship, he is saying that, well, yeah, the studying philosophy has made me more capable of living without it. The ability to think for oneself, the ability to organize your thoughts and express your thoughts in a critical and incisive manner. Well, obviously that is going to upset certain people, and there you get a little hint there as to why perhaps this never really saw the light of day as a speech or the 900 Theses. when you reject all authorities, when you reject all judgments of others, you reject the idea of authority itself. You reject the idea of power, and that is going to create some hostility and resistance by the powers that be of the time. But he is not necessarily throwing off the classics, obviously, throwing off those people who have come before him. He is just reconsidering them, and reconsidering them in his own light. He has proposed a harmony between Plato and Aristotle, which is a project that has bedeviled many philosophers for quite a long time. He mentions himself that Boethius tried to do this, but died before he really had the chance. The idea of taking the rationality of Plato and his notion of the immaterial forms, along with the materialist, more empirical Aristotle, and trying to find, well, where do they meet? What is the truth at the center of that? Always trying to harmonize the distinctions among a discipline. And he casts a very wide net with that. That is one of his great goals. He never quite manages that. Most scholars agree. In the speech, he does defend his project of the 900 Theses. He does make a full-throated argument for mysticism of a couple of different traditions, specifically Kabbalah, perhaps most notably among them, and the notion of that almost contradicts some of the rigor of the scholarship that he has brought along to his project, but he privileges that as worthy of the discussion as well, because he says that, well, okay, a lot of wisdom doesn't have the authority of having been written down, but rather he points to traditions like Kabbalah, where it tends to be a much more conscripted wisdom that is passed down through generations, often along very narrow lines, not a broad-based group at all, but one that is more of a self-contained sect, transmitting through the decades, through the centuries, with a very tightly controlled base of knowledge, not one meant for popular dissemination. And he's saying that, well, that's right too. That can be part of our vision. And there you can see, if perhaps taken to a faulty extreme, his method of taking in everything and bringing it into focus within a unified field theory of humanity. Nothing outside the vision. Because he, by mastering so many languages and learning so much, swallowing so much of human culture whole, he was interested in integrating it all into a single project. And to exclude something and say, well, no, not that. No, not that. That becomes limiting. And if you limit the scope of your discussion, if you limit the scope of your intellectual project, you can never really be thorough with it. And it's only through being thorough, only through incorporating everything, that you can achieve a vision of God. Because God didn't exclude everything theoretically. God didn't say, okay, not this, not that, not that. God created everything. And if he created something, then by definition, as we read in Genesis, if he created it, then in some capacity it is good. And so if you want to be like God, if you want to be able to be worthy of that distinction, of the privilege that God has bestowed upon you. You owe it to yourself and to God to make the most of yourself, to take everything in, to get your mind around it, even if it's hard. You're not supposed to crawl along the ground. You're supposed to reach for the stars. And that's Pico's great conception that shapes everything that follows. He was very early in this assessment, and he was leaned on in Italy and beyond for a long time in terms of how we defined what humanism is. And he breaks it down into just a few basic core concepts that he articulates in this oration. Number one, humanity is special due to its capacity for free will. We can choose what we want to be. We can choose what we want to do. Humanity is outside the great chain of being. It is separate, able to view the organization of the great chain of being and the organization of all creation and appreciate it from a kind of objective, philosophical, rational distance, outside. Humanity improves. It approaches divinity through studying philosophy and the liberal arts. We want to be more like God. We have the capacity to be more like God. But we have to work at it. We have to choose to work at it. And the liberal arts themselves, philosophy itself, are stronger when broader in scope. Take in everything that you possibly can, because God could take in everything. Why can't you? If you are special in a divinely sanctioned way, then you have to maximize your potential and strive to be like God. And that's the Renaissance.